I need to share this. Okay.
Colleagues, I think we're ready to start the webinar. We have a few minutes still to get the participants in. We try to start right on time. But just to make sure, everybody is connected, and then you can see the screen from your end. I hope if there's any challenge in terms of following the discussions, just raise your hand up, send a chat, and then we'll take note of that.
So the Q&A will be moderated then by you afterwards, right?
Yeah,
you will ask us to respond.
Yeah, I'll do the Q&A from here, and then I'll give the floor to you, the presenters, Sandra, Jessica, and you, Daniel, and you will respond as appropriate. Yeah.
Okay.
Good. So it's exactly 4 p.m. Bonn time. So let me welcome you all participants to this webinar, which is being organized by the CG, certainly with support from the Secretariat, and also we're collaborating with GIZ on this. My name is Agyemang-Bonsu. I'm the manager for Mitigation and Transparency Support program of the Secretariat. And I have here with me this afternoon to take you through the webinar. We have Sandra Motshwanedi, a CG member from South Africa. And then we also have with us Mr. Daniel Bongardt from GIZ. And also Ms. Jessica Murphy, CDM Methodological Expert. They will be presenting all the presentations that we have prepared for the session. But just by way of quick introduction, just to remind participants, I hope some of you may have been following the webinar series, particularly related to this baseline for greenhouse gas monitoring, in particular for the passenger and freight transport sector. We have had a couple of webinars in this area, and I understand that this is about our fourth webinar, which will be focusing today principally on the chapter 4 of the compendium, and Daniel will be taking us through the details of it. We'll be looking at alternative fuels, incentives, regulation, and production within the transport sector, and talking about how you can describe the various alternative fuels, the structure of the mitigation effects that you can be thinking of, how you determine the baseline of emissions, and also guidance on the selection of analytical tools for alternative fuels and mitigation options. And what are the monitoring opportunities or options for you in terms of trying to assess your key performance indicators in response to addressing the emissions that you will be achieving through the interventions that you will be undertaking. So without further ado, I would want to give the floor to the CG rep, Sandra from South Africa, to do the first introduction, and then we'll move on to the actual presentations on the compendium. So Sandra, you have the floor, please.
Thank you. As introduced, my name is Sandra Motshwanedi. I am from South Africa, and I'm going to give a small presentation on behalf of the CGE. So if we could maybe go to the next slide, please. So basically the agenda with regards to the presentation that I'm going to give is It includes presenting the chart on achieving emission reduction goals, as well as how the CGE tools and the training materials can be accessed. Okay, so this slide, as referred to in the topic, it says what should be incentivized, disincentivized, or regulated in order to achieve emission reduction goals. Now, if we look at there are about 4 scenarios in the graph there, and they look into identifying mitigation options. It also provides basis for identifying different mitigation scenarios that reflect a future in which explicit policies, regulations, and measures are adopted to reduce sources or enhance the sinks of greenhouse gas emissions. So if we look at the top line of this chart, it illustrates a situation where there is no change in policy or regulations for a sector. So this is like the business as usual scenario. And for this webinar, we are specifically focusing on the transport sector. If we look into the next line, it indicates a situation where there is implementation of some existing policies. In other words, policies that already exist, as well as regulations that can have an impact on reducing greenhouse gas emissions or enhancing carbon sinks. So this scenario is usually referred to as a with existing measures scenario. The third line describes a situation where a mitigation assessment is performed and mitigation options are chosen. Policies, regulations, and measures are adopted to reduce the sources or enhance it of greenhouse gases over a specific time period. So this scenario is normally referred to as with additional measures scenario. So you implement new policies, therefore your emissions significantly go down over time, or they significantly decrease over time. Now the fourth line describes the situation of the maximum extent emissions can be reduced for a particular sector for a specific time period should a country be able to successfully implement a number of policies, regulations, and measures. So if a country becomes successfully at implementing a mixture of policies, regulations, and measures, then this is the situation that might occur where the maximum extent for which greenhouse gas emissions can be reduced occurs. So this is basically what this slide is about. It's about the different scenarios under which a country may find itself in with regards to its inventory. Thank you. Next slide. Now, the Consultative Group of Experts has also developed some training materials and regularly conducts webinars like this one, as well as workshops to regularly support developing countries. And as demonstrated on the slide there, those are some few links that can be accessed in order to gain access to the CGE training materials or to request the support of the CGE. So if you click on those links, you can be able to, number one, access the tools and training materials for non-Annex I reporting, for reporting in the biennial update report, as well as the national communication. And secondly, the e-network, where there are various tools of support that have been organized by the CGE and are available online. So, for example, you can get access to expert databases where you can liaise with different experts from different countries on particular areas of interest. There's the library, which contains information on training materials by the CGE, news on the latest news, the calendar on the upcoming events, as well as how one can participate in the forum. And I think this now brings me to the end of my presentation. I would like to thank you for your attention, and I would like now I would now like to hand over to the moderator as well as to the other presenters to provide you with a more insight into tools as well as methodologies that are used for assessing different mitigation scenarios for the transport sector, such as the use of alternative fuels, the policies, regulations that would be needed to translate these into a set of mitigation actions.
Okay, thank you very much, Sandra. I think we will now move on to the next presenter with Bongardt from GIZ.
Hello, everybody.
But
I think it's my turn now.
Yeah, but before Daniel starts, let me remind participants in the webinar that if you have a question, please you can send that via chat so that at least we can see that whilst we're having the webinar, and then we would, at the end of the presentations, get the responses back to you. So Daniel, please take the mic.
Yeah, thank you very much, William, for the introduction, and also thank you very much, William, and your team for organizing the webinar tonight or tomorrow or this morning or this afternoon, wherever you are at the moment. It's a pleasure for me to give you a short insight into one chapter of the Compendium on Greenhouse Gas Baselines and Monitoring for Passenger and Freight Sector on alternative transport fuels today. So I may have to start to give you a little bit of background about the publication. That publication, the Compendium on Greenhouse Gas Baselines, has been developed by a range of organizations in the year 2016 and was firstly published in 2017 with a small update earlier this year. And together with the UNFCCC Secretariat, we had now a series of webinars on all the different transport mitigation actions and how we can quantify the impact of these mitigation actions. In total, there are 8 chapters or sections in the compendium, and for each section and chapter, there's a description of the basic principles of the methodology, and then also guidance on how to select a proper methodology for your type of policy project or program. So in whatever situation you are, you may consult the compendium and understand what type of methodology is already existing. And these type of methodologies range from CDM type of projects up to broader transport sector-wide scenario analysis tools and methodologies that allow you to quantify the overall impact there. So today I would quickly introduce you into that section on alternative transport fuels. And so later, then Jessica will give you more insights and details on a specific type of tools. So I'm not sure if I can click myself now. Otherwise, please move to the next slide.
Yeah.
And so that section is about mitigation actions that cover a range of projects and policies that displace liquid fossil fuels with liquid motor fuels from renewable sources or with gaseous fossil fuels. So this does not include electric powered vehicles, which are the topic of another section of the Baseline Compendium, section 3. And so today we only talk about fuels that are burned in motor vehicles. So the overall impact, of course, is due to that a different kind of fuel with less carbon intensity or less carbon content is burned in the vehicle engine, and so the overall impact is lower. It could also be biofuels that take the carbon from renewable sources and so can be accounted as low carbon fuels as well. So if you move to the next slide, then you see that this is one of the key graphs of the Baseline Compendium in each section, because it describes the overall effects of the mitigation actions. In the first column on the action, you see here to promote alternative fuels. For example, it could be a biofuel quota, like applied in quite a number of countries to mix in biofuels into the regular fuel sold at fossil fuels sold at filling stations. So, and that means so that the vehicles using alternative fuels are increased. The number of vehicles using alternative fuels are increasing, and hence the quantity of alternative fuel use is increased a lot. So that at the same time decreases the quantity of fossil fuels. So, and in the end, the carbon content of fuel and GHG intensity is lower, so we can have less, or we will have less carbon emissions. However, we have to consider in that specific mitigation action that we have upstream emissions from fuel production. Also, fossil fuels, of course, have upstream emissions from fuel production, but emissions from biofuels, of course, are quite relevant in that respect. So they may increase when using alternative fuels, so we really have to account for them in that impact chain. So it means that we basically look at the fuel use and the number of vehicles using these type of alternative fuels, and hence those type of indicators will also be the basis for most for all the methodologies to quantify the impacts. These indicators are the key indicators to be monitored in the end, or to be assessed here. If you go to the next slide, then we see that the boundary of these type of mitigation actions, boundary setting is always very important to really understand the impact and really narrow it down to the mitigation actions and understand that there really is an impact coming up. And but for alternative fuels, that these type of actions can be taken on national level, part of the NDC, for example, could be taken by regions, or could be also on local level if, for example, a city is replacing its fleet by alternative fuel-driven vehicles. So the temporal boundary usually is 5 to 10 years, but could also be longer. And it's important to include the upstream emissions of fuel production, as this is one of the key aspects with alternative fuels. So here we have to be careful to choose the boundaries right. If we would not include upstream emissions here, the impacts would be assumed much higher. So for the transport subsector, it could be basically everything. It could be transit fleets, like public transport, or it could also be freight transport or different kinds of issues, so it's rather flexible. And of course, then if you look at the greenhouse gases, it's CO2 as the main greenhouse gas from the transport sector, but also methane and nitrogen dioxide. So on the next slide, and this is all part and taken from the compendium chapter, so if you would like to have a look at that, you could get a little bit further details. One chapter of that compendium is about 8-9 pages, so it's easy to read and overlook. So if you want to have more insights, you can look at that. Maybe it's also available for download within that webinar here. Otherwise, I will provide you the link later. And so the analysis approach basically can be two different ways. The top-down approach is, of course, then measuring the amount of alternative fuel used. For example, if you compare the fuel sold at a filling station before and after the intervention. So then you can calculate based on the carbon intensity of the fuels, the emission savings. However, many projects or interventions also choose a bottom-up methodology. meaning that we look at the number of vehicles driven by alternative fuels and the distances these vehicles are running. So I think Jessica will give quite more detail on methodologies touching these type of issues later, so I won't go into details here. Of course, I've mentioned already regarding the uncertainties. So for ex-ante assessments, there might be high uncertainty how much of the fuel really can be displaced, and so then the second uncertainty is that the life cycle emission for alternative fuels here, we really have to consider land use changes and these type of things, so that must be a very important aspect to consider. So also the European Union limited all the support programs to fuels that at least, to biofuels that at least save 50% of the emissions here. So going to the next slide, and I think it's almost the last. So that chart is maybe a little bit complicated here, but I just want to give you the chance to look at it. This is a kind of a navigator on the methodologies that are existing. So we separate, when giving an overview about the methodologies, about ex ante. If you look on the rows on the left, the top two rows, they cover methodologies that allow you an assessment before you implement the project. So for example, you could prioritize policies, or you could do your mitigation planning from your NDC, and you want to understand what the mitigation impact is here. So on the bottom, you see ex post methodologies that basically let you monitor what the impacts have been once you have implemented a project. And of course, CDM methodologies are under that area. If you look at the columns, you will see that from the left, where you have lower accuracy, to the right, where you have the high accuracy tools, we try to give you a very quick first overview about the methodologies, what you can expect from them. And you have to be clear that for higher accuracy assessment methodologies, there's also a much higher need for data. So you need to have more data and more assumptions in that to use that, while for lower accuracy methodologies, they are more default used in that analysis, and it's less accurate on that aspect. So having said that, and having given you that overview, I would like to show you the last slide. Oh no, that's not the last slide. There's one between. So for each of the methodologies in the navigator, there's a table, and later there's given more details who developed that methodology and where you can download it. So that's also part of the compendium. And now I come to the last slide, where you can see the download link. So that's the publication. You have in chapter 4, starting on page 72, all the details on what I've said here, so you can have a further look into that, and you also have all the links to the different methodologies listed there, so you get in. And I also would like to acknowledge again all the contribution from the other partners that we together developed the compendium. In addition to the Secretariat, it's the Center for Clean Air Policy, ICCT, the Partnership for Sustainable Low Carbon Transport, UNDP, INFRAS, and it was supported by the German Ministry for Environment through their International Climate Initiative. So we were able to develop that in that context. So thank you very much for your attention, and I think I hand back to William.
Okay. Thank you very much, Daniel, for that overview presentation, and I hope it's already generated some interesting questions which we need to look at responding to. I'll now give the floor to Jessica, who will be looking at CDM methodologies in accordance with this section of the compendium. Jessica, please have the mic.
Thank you very much. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. And I am now going to discuss some of the CDM methodologies that are relevant for baseline setting and monitoring of the results and mitigation actions related to the use of alternative fuels. So from Daniel's presentation, the general introduction to this chapter of the compendium, now we'll focus in a bit on specific methods that can be used that are also described in the compendium. Could you, next slide, please? So, as I said, within the compendium itself, there is a list of different types of analysis tools that can be used to estimate or calculate the mitigation impact of the use of alternative fuels in mitigation actions. There are some more general methods, and then in this table of the compendium, the bottom-up ex-post guidance is presented. So these are mainly CDM methodologies, and bottom-up meaning that they use kind of data from all of the vehicles or et cetera that are being impacted by the mitigation action, and ex-post meaning that they're designed to calculate emission reductions based on the implementation of a mitigation action. What happens once mitigation action is actually underway? Next slide, please. Here I show you some of the, or all of the CDM methodologies that are applicable for alternative fuel mitigation actions that are available from the CDM. These are also mentioned in the compendium. So we have 6 methodologies, and these group into kind of 3 main strategies for determining the baseline for alternative fuels, and then also monitoring. The first kind of way that the baseline is determined for alternative fuels is described in this methodology AMS3S, Introduction of Low Emission Vehicle Technology to Commercial Vehicle Fleet. So in this case, the baseline takes into account what would happen with the commercial vehicle fleet in the absence of the use of alternative fuels. So baseline is defined based on the assumption of how the fleet would continue to operate using the fossil fuels that was applying prior to the use of alternative fuels. So the baseline is defined, the baseline in terms of for emission estimation purposes is defined as an emission factor per passenger kilometer or per ton kilometer in terms of the passengers or goods that are being transported by these commercial vehicles. Next, we have a group of methodologies which are all aimed at determining the baseline for the new production and the use in vehicles of biofuels. And we have the 3 small-scale methodologies, AMS3T, AMS3T, which is described in material production and use of fuel, AMS3AK, that's biodiesel production and use, and AMS3AQ, which is about production and use of bio-CNG. So this is basically biogas from different types of anaerobic processes like landfills, anaerobic digestion, wastewater treatment. And finally, there is a large-scale methodology, ACM17, for production of biofuels. That's quite general. In the case of these methodologies, the baseline is assumed to be the use of fossil fuels in the vehicles that, in the case of the project, apply these alternative fuels. So, for calculation purposes, the baseline is defined as the emission factor per unit of fossil fuel displaced by the biofuel. Finally, we have AMS3AY, which is for the introduction of LNG buses to existing and new bus routes. So this is obtained usually from fuels that are used by traditional buses, mainly diesel, and is switched to LNG. This methodology uses a different strategy for determining the baseline because it's related to the existing efficiency and emissions intensity of the operation of buses on the bus route. So the baseline emissions are defined based on the emissions per kilometer of the buses on a specific route, taking into account the operating conditions on the route and the type of fuel that's being used in the baseline. Next slide, please. Each of these methodologies also provides the factors that must be monitored or tracked during the operation of the project to be able to determine the emissions impact of the alternative fuel use. So again, the 6 methodologies group into 3 main strategies. I'd like to draw attention especially to the 4 in the middle, which are about biofuel production and use. In this case, the main things that must be monitored during the operation of the mitigation action to determine the emission reduction are the amount of project fuel produced, and also the amount that is actually can be shown to be consumed or sold or blended, so that it's clear that that fuel is arriving and is making it to a user who will be using it in transportation and substituting other types of fuel. It's also important to monitor the characteristics of the project fuel produced, namely its energy content, to understand how the volume of that fuel can replace the volume of alternative fuel that might have a different energy content. And as Daniel mentioned, in the case of alternative fuels, especially biofuels, it's very important to take into account the upstream emissions related to the production of those fuels. So in these production methodologies, it's also required to monitor emissions related to cultivation of the plant product biomass that's used for the production of the biofuel. They're considering things like if there's any deforestation taking place, or also shifts in carbon stocks that can take place as a result of the cultivation, and also emissions from biofuel production. So when the biofuels are produced in some kind of factory or processing plant, energy use and et cetera related to the production of the biofuel. On the other 2 cases, the main monitoring requirement is also related to the alternative fuel consumption during the project, and then it's required to monitor some factors related to the operation of the commercial vehicle fleet in the case of the first methodology, or the operation of the bus route in the case of the last methodology, so that a comparison can be made with the level of activity in the business. Next slide, please. So the compendium goes into detail about mapping the life cycle of GHG emissions in the transport sector. Here we have another figure taken from the compendium that describes why it's important to take into account life cycle, or what the life cycle emissions are taken into account in the CDM methodologies for alternative fuels. You can see on the left the different types of measures that can be taken to reduce emissions in this area, and we're going to focus on the middle one, which is fuel change. And then you can see the columns represent different parts of the life cycle of the use of related to the use of those fuels for which emissions need to be taken into account. So in the center is activity and operation. This is kind of the obvious step. Emissions related to fuel combustion need to be taken into account in order to understand what the emissions impact is of the use of an alternative fuel. But obviously, the upstream emissions that we've mentioned are also crucial. And in the terms of biofuels, these are again related to cultivation and production of the biofuel, and the CDM methodologies account for these. At the same time, of course, the fuels that are being displaced by the alternative fuels, the fossil fuels, also have upstream emissions related to their production. So in the case of the CDM methodologies, these methodologies also allow you to take into account the avoidance of upstream emissions from fossil fuel production. So upstream emissions both from biofuels and from fossil fuels may be taken into account when considering the emissions impact of an alternative fuel mitigation action. Next slide, please. Now, as we talk about these alternative fuel projects, I wanted to also give all of you an idea about what the magnitude of emission reduction can be from switching to an alternative fuel. So each of you, wherever you are, you're welcome to maybe write down on a piece of paper what you think the estimated CO2 savings per car per year are for these different types of switches, and then we'll see how that compares to what fuel savings, emission savings might be from each of these types of switches to alternative fuel. So I put together these estimations using some assumptions a lot of IPCC default data about fuel energy content, emission factor, and density, etc. And the idea was just to get kind of an order of magnitude estimate of what kinds of emission reductions you can achieve by switching to alternative fuel. So, the first case would be where the baseline fossil fuel is gasoline, and then the alternative fuel is CNG, another fossil fuel. I'm wondering what you think the CO2 savings per year per car might be for this type of fuel switch. Okay, next, please. Switch. Okay, so in this case, not yet. So in this case, there may be about 1.5 tons of CO2 per car per year. Now, if you look at a switch from a baseline fossil fuel like diesel to an alternative fuel like a biodiesel, and I set this at a B20 because, which is a 20% biodiesel or 80% petrodiesel, and because this is a type of fuel that can generally be used without having to make any changes to the technology. So if you do a switch from full petrodiesel to a B20, the estimated tons of CO2 savings per year might be about 1. And finally, if we look at the case of baseline fossil fuel being petro CNG or fossil CNG, changing to an alternative fuel, which is a bio-CNG, so biogas, compressed biogas. In this case, we see that the savings per car can be a bit higher because we're actually moving from fully fossil fuel to a full biofuel. So in this case, estimate is about 5 tons of CO2 savings per year. But in any case, as you can see, these types of alternative fuels applications really, in order to have a large impact in emissions savings, there needs to be a lot of vehicles involved. Next page, please. In terms of projects that are publicly available that we know are applying these types of CDM methodologies, there are several CDM projects and QAs that have been registered applying almost each of them.
Yes. Just tell her the voice is so low. Just tell Jessica the voice is so low. Give me the mic. Jessica, your voice is quite low. Can you maybe speak close to the mic?
Okay. I'll try to speak up.
Yeah.
So, excuse me. So, we can see there are different types of projects that can use test methodology. For example, we see a commercial vehicle project in Malaysia, which put into place LNG-powered offshore support vessels, and probably in a port city. We see, for example, an LNG bus promoting program in China, which aims to substitute traditional buses with LNG-powered buses. And we can see several projects related to biofuel production in various countries in South America and Asia. And these include biodiesel production, non-crude oil, plant oil production, and CNG production. So there are quite a few types of projects that qualify as alternative fuel projects. Nevertheless, at this point, the Methodologies project has issued CER, so we can't draw any lessons learned yet on the application of these methodologies in the monitoring phase of the project. Next slide, please. So finally, some conclusions about baseline and monitoring for mitigation actions using alternative fuels. And as we saw, the bottom-up ex-post accounting, like the kind that is described in the CDM methodology, may require monitoring the amount of project fuel produced and also the amount consumed and sold or blended to final users to ensure that the project fuel is in fact replacing baseline fuel. So that can be can require important effort for tracking data related to fuel sales and consumption. So in order to, when you are ready to calculate emissions impact baseline and monitor here's the guidance that should be the objective. That is your objective, and that is the impact of the estimation. So, for example, if the project contains emissions trading, then it is important to apply, for example, CDM methodology, where for example, policy prioritization and making it appropriate to use one of the other kind of estimation methods that was described by Daniel and our in the compendium. However, of course, keeping in mind that the CDM methodology, even in the absence of emissions trading, provide detailed guidance that can be adapted to a variety of uses. So the CDM methodology could also be adapted, for example, to estimate or monitor the emissions impact of alternative fuels, for example, for and update reporting, or even for policy communication. So with that, on the slide. Thank all of you for your attention, and I see there are also some questions coming in.
Okay, okay, thank you very much, Jessica. I think that brings us to the end of the presentations, and I would like to thank Sandra, Daniel, and Jessica for the presentations. For you, Sandra, I think I have one question that maybe you might want to respond to. And the question is, you presented a graph that showed maximum emission reduction achievable. And the question is, does that include public and private collaboration to pursue pilot projects to enable technologies that extend emission reduction in this type of projects? It's quite difficult to understand what the question means, but at least I hope you get a gist of it. Then to Daniel, there is a question from a colleague in Nigeria who is asking what methodologies are there for maritime transport. And then again, for Daniel, for LNG in buses, is it possible to model turbine and an electric hybrid vehicles which minimizes batteries for all electric drive, and in urban areas may reduce fossil fuel consumption by say 70%. And the comment following that sort of question is that this technology is presently struggling. So is it possible for LNG in buses to be able to address this type of issues? And the last question to Jessica is on emission reductions per year per car, which you provided in one of your slides. What is the assumptions on annual mileage? So I will give the floor quickly to you, first to Sandra, if you want to respond, or if you want me to repeat the question, I could, but maybe you had it, so you could just respond to it quickly. And then I'll move on to Daniel for the next two questions and Jessica for the last one. Sandra.
Thank you. Yes, indeed, to be able to achieve that level of emission reduction, then you would need both involvement from the public as well as the private sector. So for an example, in the transport sector, then you would have to mix your measures, your policies, as well as your regulatory framework. And of course, as governments, you cannot do this alone. So you need all your key stakeholders, including the private sector. Hope I understood the question well. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that was a question, and thank you, Sandra.
Okay, so then I take the next one, right?
Yeah, and Daniel, before we start, there's also another one for you. What will be the appropriate mitigation tool for transport sector?
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if I understood the last one correctly, but I'll start with the first one, and then we'll try to answer, and maybe whoever has asked that question can maybe clarify that again.
Okay.
So I was asked what methodologies are there for maritime transport. So of course there are options also to replace the alternative fuels for maritime transport, and I think the general methodologies that are especially used for ex-ante assessment, so meaning that before the intervention is taken, like the CCAP guidebook that gives guidance on that type of fuel, because the basic principle is the same whether it's a maritime vessel or it's a vehicle, so the amount of fuel that is produced needs to be accounted against the other fuels. So that could be applied here as well. However, there's also another section in the compendium. In section or chapter 6, we have a freight mode shift from roads to water, including also short sea shipping, and there's also a number of methodologies listed there, including an example on switching freight to short sea shipping. So even beyond alternative fuels, there are of course also some methodologies out there. And if none is existing, then of course it's in principle possible to develop some. While the CDM methodologies that are existing may also apply, but maybe Jessica better to answer that question, whether they are also ready-made for maritime transport. So for the LNG in buses, that's certainly an option that has been applied. However, and there are also quite a number of electric hybrid vehicles, and it may also work on hybrid vehicles with LNG. However, in that area, I'm not an expert, so I cannot answer the detailed question. What I see from our experiences and also from our partners, that especially for buses now in the last couple of months, so more and more cities all under different programs or city networks like the C40 city network or also eClay, energy cities. Cities now start to look more and more at full battery electric buses, as especially for urban buses, the routes are very clear, and it's very clear also where they run, how many kilometers they run. It's easy to provide charging stations here. And as battery electric vehicles are very efficient, so the amount of renewable energy from wind or solar that could be used then in these type of buses may be even lower, so the mitigation impact is higher, and it also allows to completely decarbonize that subsector of transport. So it might be useful to also look into chapter 3 that looks at vehicle efficiency improvement programs, including also electrification. So, and then the last question, what will be appropriate tools there? So I don't understand the question completely. However, for a number of methodologies listed in the compendium, there are tools available. So that means that the methodology comes, for example, with an Excel spreadsheet tool, and some of the defaults already are in that tool. For example, for a high accuracy ex-ante assessment methodology, the US-American MOVES mobile vehicle emission simulator. That tool is tailor-made for American cities, that allows also to the cities to calculate that and just input the data. However, it might take quite a high effort to adopt it to another situation, and that is really tailor-made for that specific situation in American cities. So there are tools out there, but as I understand, for the CDM methodologies, and that maybe Jessica again can answer to, that is a a description of the methodology, and you would have to do your own tool in Excel, and it's not coming with a tool in total, but of course there will be tools available from consultants and consultancies who are setting up that project. So I think that's my answer.
Thank you very much, Daniel, for those comprehensive responses. I think you covered most of them. Now, Jessica, would you want to respond to the questions presented to you, but also if you want to comment on the others that Daniel has already responded to? Jessica.
Sure, thank you. Well, with respect to the question about the assumption on kilometers per year for those estimations, I assumed 30,000 kilometers per year. So that was kind of activity level of the vehicle for the basis of that calculation. And with regards to the question about methodologies for maritime transport, most of the CDM methodologies that I mentioned today are not specific to a certain location of the transport, let's say, especially the biofuel production methodology. The only aim is to substitute use of fossil fuels with an alternative fuel. So most of those could be applied also in maritime or river settings. And also, in terms of tools or maybe calculation tools related to the CDM methodologies for alternative fuels, as I recall, none of these have their own, let's say, Excel or calculation tool associated. However, it is worth noting that some of the methodologies related to biofuel production do include default factors, for example, related to cultivation or land use, that can be used to help simplify the calculation of the emissions impacts, especially related to those upstream emissions that may very well be kind of outside of the control of whomever is implementing the mitigation action. So that might be useful in making emissions estimations.
Okay, so thank you very much, everybody, in particular to Sandra, Daniel, and Jessica for those presentations and also response to the questions that were raised. I think this brings us to the end of the webinar. I would want to thank all participants who have stayed with us. I can see we still have about 32 participants who are still tuned in, listening to us, and maybe also participating in some of the questions that were also being responded to. I would want to thank you very much, and hopefully we'll have the opportunity to cover another round of the webinar that will take us to the next chapter of the compendium. But what I would say before closing finally is that we encourage you strongly to go back to this compendium as it provides in-depth information on what we have tried to present in 45 minutes. Certainly we cannot cover the depth of information that is presented in the compendium. So we would encourage you, it's free, just download, read. If you have any questions, certainly you can share with us and we will be able to respond to them in time. So thank you very much for today. And again, have a nice afternoon, morning, or evening, depending on where you are. And we hope to come around the next time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, William, for your moderation. Thanks to the UNFCCC and GISS for organizing.
Thank you to all. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, Sandra. Oh, stop recording. Yeah.